Hello and welcome to This Sustainable Life. I'm Joshua Spodek. I'm going to give you an overview of the business plan for what we're doing and what we hope to achieve and how we hope you can support us. For the full picture, watch the business plan, which is a different video. I want to start by some context. How many times have you read or heard someone say with regard to the environment, we can do this, we can solve this? The question is, will we? That to me is a question of leadership. So I want to talk about leadership. Dr. King, one of the great leaders of all time, he spoke. He did a lot of things, but he spoke and a nation followed. People willingly, voluntarily chose to go to prison for other people's freedom. That's what people are capable of. He wasn't the only one. Another big example for me around the same time was Muhammad Ali. He had decided for himself that he was a conscientious objector. And when he was drafted, he did what was not easy. Even Jackie Robinson said you should do it. But he remained a conscientious objector. He did what was not necessarily easy, but was right for him. He lived by his values. And people followed. Who? Well, for one person, Dr. King, several months later, he spoke out against Vietnam. Muhammad Ali was one of the first to do it. I think he was probably the first major figure to do it. And I put to you that if you lead Dr. King, you're an effective leader. Now, there are lots of other areas too. Dr. Edwards Deming, in the area of business, he did lots of things in the United States, but the big thing was in Japan in 1950, post-war, he applied a systems approach, that is a leadership approach, to their industry. The world knew them as producers of cheap junk, and they didn't really value what Japan produced. He worked with them and led them to, within 4 years, the world started putting up protectionist tariffs because Japan was producing high quality, still low cost, but high productivity and high morale, quality goods. He helped turn that country around in 4 years, and that was a systems leadership approach. Now I'm contrasting leadership with management. I want to clarify that. Dr. King did not say, I have a 4-point plan. That would be management. Now he did have plans, and he did have leadership, he did have management techniques and teams to make these things happen. He said, I have a dream, and that's leadership. And I put to you that that difference does not, well, in the area of sustainability, there are no leaders in the area of sustainability. There are many managers. Al Gore, McKibben, Greta Thunberg, DiCaprio, Musk, the IPCC, all about spreading facts, making plans. Scientists, educators, journalists, politicians, and engineers all are managing. And to clarify that, managers work with facts and figures, things that are easily measurable. They work within a system, often to make that system more efficient, to work more efficiently. They tend to instruct people. They give them carrots and sticks, incentives to do things. And when a manager is very effective, a manager gets compliance. By contrast, leaders do things that are different. Some of the differences are that they work with stories, images, and beliefs, things that are less tangible, but nonetheless motivational. They work often on the system to change a system, not just make it efficient, but change it to be based on different values and so forth. They often make the system more resilient, which can be the opposite of efficiency. They often listen to others to understand their values, because when a leader is effective, a leader inspires. Now, I don't want to say management is bad. On the contrary, it's critically important. But you won't change a system without also leading. Now, leadership without management, you're going to get dreamers. And I don't want to say there should just be just leadership. Management without leaders, you get a bureaucracy like the DMV, very effective at doing something, but very difficult to change. But leaders and managers together, then you can change a system. What I see and what inspired me to get started into what is now This Sustainable Life is that I saw no Mandela of the environment, no Dr. King or Gandhi of the environment. And I decided I would become a Mandela of the environment. If that's what was most important to do, and I was looking for something to do and no one else was doing it, I would do it. And how does that happen? Well, systemic change begins with personal transformation. I'm not aware of a national or global or large-scale systemic cultural change that did not begin with at least one person going through a personal transformation. By contrast, this is the UN speaking about climate change. Does this inspire you? I can't think of the UN as an organization or the people within the UN as people living by the values that they tell others to live by. Likewise, Al Gore, I tremendously value the work that he's done that has gotten us here. But he flies around a lot. He, for better or for worse, motivates people who disagree with him as much as people who agree with him. Likewise, Leonardo DiCaprio is telling people to produce less greenhouse emissions while he himself flies around all the time. Now, some people would say I'm calling them out for hypocrisy, and that is not what I'm talking about. I'll say in a second what I'm talking about. I also want to point out that leadership does not require you to be someone from the White House or an Oscar winner or the heavyweight champion of the world. I think of people who inspire me, the first women to wear pants in the modern day in the West. We don't even know who they are. I mean, we have some names. So, to some extent, we know that they had to have police escorts at times. There was vitriol poured upon them. But all they did was wear pants. They simply lived by their values. And do you know any women today who do not wear pants? They have influenced billions of people, despite being regular people. Like all the leaders that I spoke of before, each embraced and loved living by their values. In some sense, it's as simple as that. And then others will embrace and love following you when you do that. I have a friend who's an investor, and he said to me, Josh, you can't have all these purity tests for people. If they don't live up to these things, then they can't act, and then people won't act. Now, I told him it wasn't a purity test, but he didn't quite get it until later in the conversation. He had forgotten what he had said about there, but we were talking about something else. And he said, if I invest in a company, the CEO must sell, must love sales. I said, is that a purity test? It sounds like a purity test. But he had forgotten what we had said earlier. And he said, it's not a purity test. If the person doesn't sell, he can't or she can't inspire people to act. He can't get together the customers, the employees, the vendors, all the different people that otherwise might not align. But if that person sells well and loves it, that means that they're going to live it and they have integrity, and that will create the credibility to align and inspire all the different otherwise conflicting people, or it changes all that finger pointing into everybody aligned to work together. The stakes are high. You've probably read the world has just over a decade to get climate change under control, say UN scientists, and that was over 2 years ago. And that was an underestimate of the time because there's plastic, there's deforestation, there's pandemics, there's mercury in fish. And I don't have to tell you about this because it's front page news nearly daily. We don't need a lot of leaders, but we at least need one. What does a sustainability leader need? That person needs experience in science to understand nature and what's going on. Understand business, because you have to interact with business. That's where the change has to happen. And also, this person is going to be operating a business. And this person has to have entrepreneurship experience and initiative to start these things. This person has to be an effective leader, be effective at public speaking, and have credibility and integrity to live sustainably, and to love doing the relevant grunt work. I hope that there are a lot of people with these criteria out there, but there's at least me in all of these things I've experienced and deep passion and success. You may know a fair amount about me, but here's a little bit. I have 5 Ivy League degrees, including a PhD in physics. I helped build a satellite in orbit now, taking data. I don't think anybody knows all the science behind our environmental issues, but a PhD in physics I think is a pretty good grounding. I think I understand the science pretty well. I left academia to start my first company. Here's the first Wall Street Journal article about my company. That company had an 8-digit valuation. We operated on 4 continents. We had our ups, we had our downs, we had our ups, we had our downs. Went back to business school to get an MBA. That's where I learned leadership and started practicing and teaching and coaching leadership. My first book became a #1 bestseller. I teach leadership at NYU, and I have scores of reviews like this to speak to my public speaking and leadership. This is one of the greatest classes I've ever taken. It was engaging, thought-provoking, challenging, fun, incredible teacher, mentor, friend. If I could take this class all over again, I would. Nonetheless, if you asked me 10 years ago, what could you do, Josh, with regard to the environment? Could you steward? What could I do? I would think, well, I could vote. Maybe if I worked at it, I could create some technology to make things more efficient. If we could get fusion working, I often thought, if we could get energy without carbon emissions, without radioactivity, that would be very important. If we could sequester all the pollution and carbon and greenhouse gases in the air and put that underground, that would work. But those are big global things. That would mean government and corporations. So if I really thought of what I could do outside of voting, I really didn't think of much. Nonetheless, I noticed that I did have an effect on my environment. Even if governments and corporations are the only things that, at the time, that's what I thought, were the only things that could make a global scale difference, I could still look at my garbage. And I challenged myself to go for a week buying no packaged food. It's a whole long story, but I can tell you at the beginning, I thought, this is a sacrifice. I live in New York, there's great food all around. Packaged food meant convenience, it meant saving money, it meant less time. So I thought this was an obligation, that I would have to try to take one for the team. It felt like a chore, it felt like a burden. Nonetheless, I tried. And to my great surprise, I found the exact opposite. Before then, I always had chips in my cupboard, always ice cream in my freezer. And my life changed to being much more about vegetables, and not just fresh fruits and vegetables and produce, but everything that goes with it. Cooking. This is the farm that I visit every year where I get most of my vegetables from in the summer and fall. In fact, one of these plants probably became dinner for me. Bigger than the material change of my diet changing and my habits changing, my mindset shifted to where I expected that living by my environmental values would improve my life, so that when I found other ways that I was polluting, I would change them. To the point where today, my equivalent of loving sales, of living the grunt work, of loving it, is that once I learned how much pollution flying caused and that I could do something about it, I challenged myself to go for a year without flying. I'm now in my 5th year without flying. It takes me 16 months to fill up a load of garbage. This is 1 year of garbage for me, and now I produce less than that even. Likewise, I pick up at least one piece of trash per day. The media's caught on with that. I've been on several shows, so I'm in my 5th year of picking up garbage every day. And some people say, wait a minute, is this some big sacrifice for you? And I ask, did Muhammad Ali sacrifice? Because after they convicted him, they took away his boxing license, they took away his passport. He couldn't practice at what would have been the peak of his career, his craft. A few years later, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, overturned his conviction. Kids today know Muhammad Ali was a great boxer, but they don't understand what made him him. And I believe that him standing up for what he believed was right and sticking with that made him the greatest. When someone says the greatest, I think Muhammad Ali, not just the greatest boxer, but one of the greatest people of all time. And again, you don't have to be some heavyweight champion of the world. Regular people can become just as influential, to influence billions of people. When I realized that there was no Mandela of the environment, I decided to act. My first thing was to start the Leadership in the Environment podcast. On that podcast, I lead leaders to share their environmental values and to act on them, to become role models for others. Now, part of what we're doing for the stage is to change the brand to The Sustainable Life, which we believe will be a little more catchy. But the podcast has been very successful. These are the guests of some of the most downloaded episodes. People have become peers to me. They suggest other people to be on the podcast as well. So for example, there's Anna Tobias, who's an Olympic gold medalist and won the CrossFit Games. Dominic Barton, McKinsey's 3-time global managing director. This is the pinnacle of the business world. Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough president. Brooklyn would be the 3rd largest city in the country. He's a major politician. Seth, Nobel Peace Prize honoree. Rip, a 3-star Marine Corps general. Coleman Hughes, this is him speaking to Congress before he graduated college. So this is a cultural figure of a different generation. We have a wide variety of leaders on the podcast. Coming soon, we hope, Oprah, LeBron, Madonna, Serena. Why? Because people follow role models. These are very influential people, and the people who've been on the podcast enjoy the experience. I believe that they will enjoy sharing and acting on their environmental values as much as all the other guests have. And when they do, they will become role models. They will help create a legacy for others to follow. I'm going to help them with that. The podcast is already growing. This Sustainable Life Sweden has begun. This Sustainable Life has begun in London and soon in Italy, Brooklyn, Kyoto, and more. And it's not just us growing. We've been approached by, and we're working with, a Senate campaign, mayors in several different cities, legislators at the local, state, and federal level, C-suites of global firms, an Ivy League dean, and increasingly influential people. Besides our growing out there, we're growing as a team. So there's a 5-person core team. Alton does video. Movies he's worked on have done very well at Cannes. He's worked on American Experience, Nova. He's worked with Bill Moyers for 6 years. Jill is a global figure in PR. She's worked with Oprah. She's worked on billion-dollar campaigns. Soren knows how to grow online. Sarah was COO with Marshall Goldsmith Inc., where she worked with several #1 rated leaders and gurus and so forth. And then there's me. And our first major project, given the talent that we have, is to create a TV series. If you'll permit me some Hollywood speak, the TV series we want to create is Carl Sagan's Cosmos, a personal voyage in science, meets I Have a Dream, meets An Inconvenient Truth, but without the politics. We believe the public wants this message. They want to act. They just don't want to be first. And so when they see that they're not alone, that many people are doing this, when they have leaders and role models, they will act. Now that's to reach the public. Also to work with corporate leaders, we'll follow in the footsteps of Edwards Deming, who was able to transform a nation in under 5 years. Many management approaches, things like recycling, making things more efficient, they tend to move things around. If you think of mercury, carbon dioxide, plastic, if you recycle it, it doesn't stop the virgin production of new plastic. It merely shuffles things around. That's moving things around after the bathroom is already flooded. plastic, mercury, these things don't act on their own. They respond to us and our behavior. And our behavior emerges from our beliefs, our stories, our images. This is the domain of leadership. If we want to stop the production of these things, that's leadership. That's turning off the faucet. That's what we do. We have a modest need for funds, mostly salaries. We're not trying to build a factory here. The first stage is development of the main cost is a TV show. Development is roughly a couple $100,000. When that goes into production, we expect to have to raise about $1 million. That's not just for that. We'll also be working on the books, media, public appearances, and things like that. These arrows will be driving a cultural shift in the United States from feeling like acting sustainably is a sacrifice, obligation, chore, burden. That's what it felt like for me. That's also how my podcast guests anticipated things would be. After acting, they found, like I did, community, connection, joy, more time with family, more control over your career. That's what happens when you act by your values. To put it more concisely, fruit tastes better than ice cream. It doesn't if you're knee-deep in ice cream, if your taste buds are overloaded with ice cream, if you've been flying all around the world not thinking about how your behavior affects others, it feels like deprivation and sacrifice. But when your taste buds recover, the fruit has more nuance and complexity and flavor. Broccoli tastes better than Doritos, but not if you've only been eating Doritos for a long time. Once they recover, you go back and you prefer the nuance, the complexity, the flavor, the nutrition, the knowing your farmer. Now, I'd like to say we prefer nature to pollution, but that's not how it is inside. From a leadership perspective, we don't actually think, I'm going to go pollute the air when we fly. We don't think about that part at all. When you make this shift, what happens is, well, this is Central Park. It's a bike ride away from me on a nice day, a nice walk. This is my backyard. When you get this, what I mean when I say peaches taste better than ice cream is that nature is all around us. A local park is just as joyful, actually more so when you get into it, as anything in the world. When you love peaches more than ice cream, when your local park becomes a fountain of nature for you, the other stuff, ice cream, doesn't look so appealing. And yes, the Eiffel Tower is great to visit, but a lot of what's handed to you on these vacations starts looking like gimmicky stuff that you're not really that into. This is a major cultural shift. I'm talking about big changes. There's precedent. When I was a kid, smoking meant Humphrey Bogart. It was glamorous. Today, lung cancer. There's lots of doubt about the science. From a management perspective, there's a lot of question. But from a leadership perspective, the imagery has changed. The goal of this sustainable life is to change people's beliefs and imagery from what I do doesn't matter to I don't have to steward. I get to steward. Because when we want to do it, we will all do it and we will create community, connection, joy, more connection with family, more control over our careers. We hope that you will support us.